Time now for the second part of my Orville Season 2 review. We're going to cover episodes 4 to 7. I said that the first 3 episodes were a bit of a mixed bag. Thankfully, these 4 are a big improvement, especially episodes 4 and 5. Nothing Left on Earth Excepting Fishes is a story centered around Ed and his new romantic interest, Lieutenant Janelle Tyler. While taking a trip away together, they get ambushed and captured by the Krill. It's later revealed that Lieutenant Tyler is actually a Krill operative posing as a human to lure Ed into a trap and obtain classified Union information. But she's not just any Krill officer, she's the same Krill school teacher he met last season. She's Talea. Long story short, the Krill vessel is attacked by an enemy vessel, and Ed and Talea are forced to take an escape pod to a nearby planet. She takes him prisoner, and then they're forced to work together in order to send a distress call using a transmitter. As she can't be out and about in the sunlight for any length of time, she's forced to trust Ed to ensure that they're rescued. The story is somewhat reminiscent of the Star Trek The Next Generation episode The Enemy, in which Geordi is stranded on a planet with a Romulan, and also the Enterprise episode Dawn, where Trip is stranded on a planet with an alien. Yeah, the stranded on a planet with an enemy and you have to work together thing is not super original in sci-fi, but the unique twist on the story is that Ed and Talea have a romantic history, albeit a fake one. Ed believes that despite the cultural differences between the Krill and the Union, that peace can be brokered. Talea explains that her hyper-xenophobic and theocratic culture makes that impossible. But at a personal level, he also suspects that Talea actually does harbour genuine affections for him, and that during her time posing as his girlfriend, that she developed feelings for him. She denies this, of course, but it's clear that she's not being totally honest. They're both eventually rescued, and Ed, controversially, decides to release her back to the Krill rather than have her taken prisoner. He hopes that this act of compassion might just help to lead to a dialogue between the Krill and the Union, and possibly even peace someday. Ed also leaves the door open for a romantic future between the two of them in a rather poignant conclusion. The B-plot concerns Gordon's desire to enter command training with a view to one day becoming captain, but as it turns out, he's mostly doing this to make himself more attractive to women. His story obviously provides some comic relief in this episode. A solid story overall, and the twist that Lieutenant Tyler was really a Krill and Talea of all people is not something I would ever have seen coming. I look forward to seeing this story followed up. Episode 5 is All the World is Birthday Cake. The crew of the Orville make first contact with an alien species at around current Earth-level development. The planet is called Rigor 2. The Rigor 2 society seems very similar to us right now, except they strongly believe in astrology. Both Commander Kelly Grayson and Bortus are celebrating their birthdays at the same time, but when the dates of their birthdays are revealed, they're both taken prisoner by the authorities on the planet because, essentially, they have the wrong star sign. It's known as Gilliac on this planet. On Rigor 2, Gilliacs are considered violent and dangerous, and they're placed into camps for the rest of their lives. Babies due to be born during the annual Gilliac season are removed from the womb prematurely by C-section. The reason this superstitious belief developed is because long ago, a star in the Gilliac constellation was destroyed by a black hole. This is discovered by new security chief Tala Kiali. She's another solid character and quickly integrates into the crew. She's a bit tougher and feistier than Alara and seems more mature and confident. The story concerns the Orville's attempts to rescue Bortus and Grayson, but given that this is a first contact situation, Union policy dictates that force cannot be used to extract them. There's a moment in the episode where they reference Bortus's child being forced to undergo the gender change on Moklas from last season, and how they also couldn't go in with all guns blazing and forcibly rescue the child from the court. In a self-aware moment that likely speaks to the audience reaction, Ed says, "Well, some people say we should have." I think this was a necessary thing to say, given how controversial the conclusion of that story was. Grayson and Bortus attempt to escape, but they're stopped by the prison camp guards. The Orville crew devises a means of creating a fake sun using a solar sail in order to make it seem as if the Gilliac constellation star has returned. Though not exactly the most convincing conclusion to the story, it works, and the Rigor 2 prefect agrees to release the prisoners. Of course, what happens when this society finds out that the star is fake is anyone's guess. This episode is one of the more serious installments of the Orville, with some darker and grittier moments here and there. But unfortunately, it's followed up by A Happy Refrain, an episode I did not enjoy. This is a Claire Finn Isaac-centric story about a budding romance between the two characters. Of course, Isaac is unable to return Claire's feelings as he's a machine, but he is willing to date her for the purposes of better understanding romantic relationships between organics. This is the problem I have with the Orville. It's capable of doing some straight, serious sci-fi stories, and then it descends into sitcom-style soap opera in space. Though this story isn't funny enough to make it an enjoyable light-hearted comedy episode, but if it had have been any funnier, it probably would have descended into a goofy farce anyway, so at least it managed to toe the line somewhat. This episode feels very long and drawn out, especially given that there's no B-plot to speak of. Well, except for Bortus's mustache. It's a boring episode, which even includes a long, drawn-out scene with a symphony orchestra that feels completely out of place. There is only one highlight from this episode, and that was Isaac making use of a simulated projection to make himself look human. So we finally see the actor Mark Jackson, who plays Isaac, without the costume he wears. The relationship between Claire and Isaac is just odd, in my view, and adds nothing to either of their characters. But what does make the episode at least watchable is the performances of the actors, because the script alone just isn't strong enough, in my opinion. Episode 7 is Deflectors, yet another romantic relationship/sexuality episode. I don't know why the show is being mired in this stuff so frequently, but there's times when I fear that the Orville can turn into a kind of Scrubs in space, which is something I've said before. Now, don't get me wrong, I did really like the show Scrubs, but that show was more of a turn-your-brain-off, zany, wacky sitcom, whereas the Orville is trying to be a sci-fi show with comedic elements. The interpersonal relationships on the show are certainly one of the highlights, as the characters are all fun, well-rounded, and interesting, but the constant who's dating who stuff is tiresome. The Ed Mercer/Kelly Grayson will they won't they story arc has echoes of typical sitcom romance stories we've seen before, and given the colourful and light-hearted tone of the show, sometimes I get a J.D. Elliott vibe from their dynamic. Anyway, this story is mainly based around a Moclan named Lokar, a former boyfriend of Bortus, who arrives on the Orville to help them test new regenerative deflectors. He's also romantically interested in Lieutenant Kiali, which in Moclan culture is a serious taboo, as the all-male Moclan species are not permitted to pursue relations with females. So you can probably see what the obvious metaphor is here. Bortus's husband Clyden is suspected of murdering Lokar, following the discovery of a simulated recording of him shooting him. But in truth, Lokar was merely trying to frame him for his murder and had intended on disappearing. Though there's some intrigue as to the mystery surrounding the details of his supposed murder, and I thought Lieutenant Kiali was great in this episode, the plot itself is too much of an obvious social commentary, and though I think it's a good bit better than A Happy Refrain, it's another average story overall. So that's 2 really good episodes and 2 not so good episodes. But thankfully things pick up quite a bit in the 2-part story Identity Parts 1 and 2, which I'll cover next time. Thanks very much for watching, let me know your thoughts below, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye bye.